was struggling to describe to someone what I thought about their current compensation. The struggle that CEOs have is not just the transparency, it's actually the clarity, because the clarity takes a long time to build. So if you can't defend the clarity, then you're uncomfortable being transparent.
Welcome to Encouraging Leaders, a podcast that exists to remind CEOs and aspiring CEOs that they're not alone. I'm Mark D. Braun, and today we're joined by somebody who has breathed courage into many people. I had asked my friend Gary Ridge who I should be talking to on this podcast, and he said Jana De Anda, president and co-founder of Excelerate, would be awesome. Jana was born and lived her early life in Beirut during active wartime. Jana also loves exploring different cultures and their history. She's got a superpower, her personal commitment to converting strategies into changed actions and behaviors, where the actual business results and the value is driven to ROI, is built into her and all of her work. Jana, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's so great. I love that it works out. It was so good to get to know you a little bit and hear your story. And I can't wait to share some of the learnings you've had leadership-wise. I ask this question of everybody. There's two paths in life. One is to go alone, and the other is to actually get help and support from others. When in your leadership journey did you realize, you're going up to business ownership and presidency and all those things? When did you first realize that you didn't have to accomplish everything by yourself?
Yeah, it's a great question. And this was actually very early on, and it's a positive example of this. I think oftentimes people learn this lesson because they try to do everything on their own and then they fail. This was an example of my first high-performing team that I led and had the privilege of being a part of. It was the best experience of a team environment in that high-performance mode. We all had our roles. We all knew our strengths. We all knew how to leverage those strengths. We knew each other's weaknesses. We managed to them. You could give us anything and we would execute on it. I mean, it was to the point where I thought you could take this group of people into any company and we would deliver as long as we had the subject matter expertise or know-how, right? And so that experience positively influenced my belief that it's great that you can't accomplish everything by yourself, because the power of the team, the wisdom of the team is so much greater than our individual capabilities.
Do you remember the team leader there, and how did they set that up? How did they make it?
I was actually the team leader, but it was my first team leadership experience at a young age. I guess that's not true. It wasn't my very first, but it was the first one that stands out to me. And I think that I'm a very positive person. I lead with positivity in my leadership style. Having grown up in Beirut, Lebanon, as you mentioned earlier, through war, there's really not anything that they could bring me in a day that was that big of a deal. Like it sounds so contrite to say it that way, but I'd never stressed, I mean, of course we all have like daily stress, but the stress of war puts everything into a relative perspective. And so I think it was that calm that allowed them to grow together under one another's leadership. So I think I just set the table. They're the ones that made the dinner and did everything else.
Well, it's interesting because you mentioned the hardships that you encountered early in life, the being in actual battle. What age were you whenever you were in Beirut with the active battle?
I moved to the U.S. when I was 8, so most of my youth, yeah.
Yeah, but you mentioned that experience of having really hard things around you helped you be more calm and centered in your leadership.
Yeah, 100%. I often think about the fortune of having had that upbringing, given that I survived it, but also that the perspective it gave me, the gratitude it brings forward in my everyday life, not just in leadership. And I recently was talking to a family member about this topic and sharing that I really think that was like a value to my life, that I grew up that way. And she said, a lot of people grew up in that same war, Jana. And they don't all have that same resilience and perspective on it. There are many people that choose a different path. That was the first time actually recently in the last year that I had the realization that my contribution to that experience, the fact that I chose not to be a victim, that I chose to turn it into a positive outcome and take the good away from it is a choice. That's the power of choice, right?
Yeah. I think that any bad, hard thing happens to us. I got to share that, I've now lived long enough that I can see ahead and see hard things as potential things that could be used for the learning and growth of myself and others because I've experienced enough of them. And it's hard to learn that lesson if you haven't actually experienced the challenges.
Totally. And so then think about the potential waste that I could have had in my life had I not put those lessons to work early on, because I had the fortune of learning them so young.
Do you remember any encouraging leaders, either early in your life, mentors, coaches, parents, whatever they were, that were actually saying, this is how you go through this hard stuff? Do you remember anybody that was encouraging you through those times?
Yeah. I mean, the easy answer is my mom. My mom has a massive influence on my life to this day. She's one of the smartest women I know. And, every parent-child relationship is different. And she is the perfect parent for me, for what I need. She managed to give me the structure, the sounding board, the support, knew to allow me to trust myself in my decision making. She really gave me the space and freedom. She held space for me to do the learning that I needed to do through that. Yeah. And she took time to explain everything to me so that I could take forward that rationale in future decision making processes. Nothing was left unsaid in our household as it related to my upbringing, right? So my mom stands out for sure as especially during that hardship, of course. I would say that in my career, though, I've learned more from leaders about what not to do than what to do. There's something about that I've observed a lot. I sat in meetings often in my early professional career and thought, that's not how I would have approached that conversation, which is a version of skepticism and my critical nature on things, but I think there's always a better way. And I read somewhere recently that the majority of women have never had a female mentor. Don't cite me, but I did see it in an article recently, and I thought that's actually true of me. I have never had, other than my mom, a female mentor, or even
in the business world.
In the business world, or even an example of a female leader that mentored me. There was an SVP at one of our clients very early on that I remember observing and thinking, wow, her ability to command a room, show care and candor, be direct, but still lighthearted. I took away a lot of those observations, but she and I were not in a mentorship relationship, right?
Do you remember her name?
Yeah, Marnette Perry.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about Marnette, and she was one of the people that you got to observe doing it really well. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that is actually enough, is to be able to observe somebody like, that's it. I see what I'm
totally
aiming for.
Very true. Yeah.
I know she would probably love to hear
she knows.
From you.
I have told her that before. Yeah. When she retired, I reached out to let her know that how much she meant to me on the sidelines.
Yeah. And then your mom was a female who was transparent and open and caring, and she was leading well the family.
She was. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's, I think about that statement. I had never actually heard it before, that female leaders have potentially never had a female leader that's actually mentoring and coaching them.
Yeah. So I hope to be rewriting that in the course of what I'm doing now.
How are you, when you're thinking about that coaching and mentoring, how does that get built into your leadership of Excelerate? What role do you think you play in that inside the company?
Yeah, so we at Excelerate, we take culture very seriously. We're a strategy execution firm that focuses on implementation services, but at its core, we're management consulting, and management consulting gets a pretty bad rap, sometimes for good reason, meaning that there's this low trust environment in management consulting that suggests that we think we're the smartest people in the room, that we're going to take your ideas and pitch them to senior leaders and that you're paying millions of dollars for our services. We are not doing any of that, trying to do it totally differently and rewriting it. So in order to do that, we have to have a culture internally that drives that outcome. And one of the ways that we do that is through coaches instead of managers, which is a playbook from Gary Ridge. So we've instituted this coaching model. So all of the folks that have people that they have the fortune of leading get coaching training, how to ask open-ended questions, how to have inquisitive natures, how to support them through their development. The focus of that relationship is to make me the best version of myself and to help me move my career forward. Because really, if they feel supported, I mean, this is true of every professional environment. If you can make the employee experience optimal, then you can also expect an optimal customer experience, because how they're treated is what they pull forward. So we take that very seriously here.
So you have actually built into their roles coaching as their part of their responsibilities, and you've trained them to do that, and it's part of your expectations of leaders.
Yeah.
And how do you feel like that drives the engagement? I was just looking at a Gallup survey. 32% is the average percentage of engaged employees inside of organizations, 72% at high performing or best practice organizations. I got to lead an organization where it was 90+%. And
wow.
What do you think about when you think about the connection between employee engagement and that coaching model that you're putting in place there?
Yeah.
How does it correlate?
Totally. The outcome is we have a 79 ENPS score, which I'm very proud of.
Oh my gosh.
Maybe one of the most proud, although when you said 90, I thought, well,
that's not the ENPS. That's different. It's a different score than engagement.
It is different.
Yeah, that's right. It's 79 is unbelievable. It's world class.
79 is outstanding. And
outstanding.
Those results almost made me tear, because employee surveys are something that I always brace myself for when I read them. No matter how good the environment is that I think I've created or helped to create, it's really difficult to do all the most important things right for your population. And every population is different, right? So here, what I think we've done is managed to understand this population well enough to optimize their experience in the most important, the drivers really of their satisfaction. And seeing that come through, of course, there's things we can improve on. And of course, we saw that, but seeing that come through and seeing the comments associated with that was my most proud moment in the last decade, for sure. So the outcome is partially what you're asking for. The contribution of coaching to that, I do think, is very strong, because people feel cared for here, right? Individually. Like they understand that there's this collective belonging that they contribute to, which is our ripple effect, to drive and fuel economic vitality into the communities that we serve, to include our clients and society. But what about me personally? Who's worried about me? And I think that's what the coaching relationship creates. Yeah,
it's a complex picture that you're painting to get to 79 a score like that. And I can understand it touching you. It touches me across the screen. I want every business to feel that kind of engagement. I want every employee inside of the businesses to feel that. And, it is a long journey. I think about the first time that I had a coach in my life that cared about my development. And it was early. And so it was like, oh my goodness, a leader that said, I want you to become better. And I want to pour in. I want to share with you what you're doing well. And here's the things that you're doing that are off track from they're not going to get you there.
Yeah.
And so I get goosebumps now thinking his name is Bruce Farble. And I love him because of his willingness to love me and care about me enough to share candidly what I needed to change.
Yeah.
And so that is, and then I've had leaders that haven't been that. Mm-hmm. And I've learned from them as well, what not to do and how to, like you said, you can learn from anybody.
Right.
That is really a beautiful story of being able to build it in. If you think about CEOs or listening, aspiring CEOs, they're trying to get their organizations engaged. They would love to have that kind of engagement that you're describing.
Yeah.
what would you advise them? How would you advise them? What steps would you suggest to them?
I know there's this concept of the balanced scorecard that's common inside of the OKR model. How I would describe the balance at Excelerate that we're seeking, which is, will continue to evolve over time. But I think about it as like the triangle. If we can think like red, yellow, green statuses of excellence, satisfied clients, satisfied employees, and satisfied owners, which are the shareholders because we're privately owned. At the end of the year, if we could have 3 greens, like what an amazing year that would be. And that's like how I walk away from every year, every like time bound quarter, year, biannual, whatever, however often we're looking at it. And I think oftentimes organizations index too much on one or the other, but not understanding that there's this like greater good that we're all serving. And so our client ENPS is also very high. It's at 90 right now, which I'm also extremely proud of. And so, we walked out of last year with a couple greens and a yellow, and that's a good year. Not every year is going to have 3 greens. Hopefully there's not many years with any reds, right? But it's a trade-off because it's this like continually evolving connected ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
I find sometimes that, for example, when our client NPS goes too high, I recognize that the trade-off is probably our employee experience. Like I understand the push and pull of that because they're giving so much to that client outcome that most likely they're taking away from their own lives. So there's just this balance that I think, so that would be step 1 is understanding the balance, maybe.
Understanding the balance and aiming for 3 greens as a target that you're aiming for all 3 of those thriving.
Yeah. And I think there's other organizations that would add to that triangle, right? There's obviously ESG and social impact and lots of other things that we could do today we're not doing, but yeah. And then the other thing I would get clear on, and I'm sure Gary has already shared this on your podcast, but the values, the guiding principles by which we make decisions, that culture playbook, which includes coaching for us, focuses on what it looks like to live and breathe our values internally as well as with our clients, because sometimes it's nuanced and slightly different. And they built up those statements, those behaviors, which I think means that they own them too, because they supported the generation of them.
Yeah. Well, tell me those, do you call those your pillars? I was reading, is that what you are calling your values, your pillars?
We do. Yeah. They're behind me here. Yeah. Humility, flexibility, energy, and integrity.
Yeah. I really loved reading the words behind those. Flexibility, be ready, jump in, nothing is beneath us. That says a lot in those 3 small sentences.
It says a lot to our employees. It says a lot to our clients. It's like intended to have multiple audiences and use cases, right?
Yeah, right. And those are publicly shared. So they need to mean something to everybody, every one of those 3 balanced scorecard people.
Totally.
They need to be okay that everybody's aligned in working there.
Yeah.
On those. Yeah. Give me an example of a coaching scenario where one of those pillars would be the driving force for the coaching.
The coaching conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're in the midst of redoing our performance management system, as you would expect any disruptive organization to be considering. But the existing one does have a reflection on values. How am I showing up against my values? And I'm always fascinated to see that when you cause that reflection moment, people are really honest. Like, you know what? I really didn't show that much flexibility this whatever time period, trimester, biannual, etc. I could have done better there. I really didn't lean in, or I was looking for too much structure. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so forcing the reflection is useful. We also have recognition inside of like a team, Microsoft Teams channel, where we recognize people for those behaviors when we see them. And that's a peer-to-peer, just voluntary outcome. So they're a part of how, and then our leaders live and breathe it. Like you see us having energy and you see us having humility, which is, by the way, extremely important to the disrupting the traditional consulting model. Humility, part of the reason it's there is because we don't think we're the smartest people in the room and we don't want you showing up that way. So if you came from one of those really big traditional firms where you got ahead by doing it that way, you probably won't fit in here. We know
unless you didn't like it and wanted it to be completely opposite of that.
Totally.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, humility being front and center. I think about the number of, so if you think about the ability to coach, you're training how, but if you don't have anything that you're coaching to or having a conversation about, like, here's the thing that we were both aiming for, you had agreed to aim for humility. I had agreed to aim for humility. And how do you feel like you did?
Yeah.
Where are you at? And what's stopping you from getting there? Without it written down, you've just got me versus you. And now I'm coaching you to me.
Totally.
Instead of coaching you to something else, some standard that we've both agreed to.
Correct.
Collectively. Yeah.
Yes.
It's such a powerful example. I think about, the 90, I don't want to skip over a 90 NPS for your clients is world-class. And I think the decision to set up your whole organization to serve well and to deliver value, that statement that your superpower that I got to read about, that you'd love to be able to change strategies and translate them into action. And I think about that delivery of value is what is really driving that. Tell me about that and how you do that as a business. I'm
going to answer this two ways. The first way is for our clients, because that's the way you pose the question. But then I'll also answer it
internally
from an internal perspective. Yeah. So to our clients, I would say very simply, the strategy value chain is formulation, translation, implementation. We are not the folks that help with formulation, the boardroom strategy, what you should do in the next 3 to 5 years, unless our clients ask for it specifically. Our focus, our playing field is translation and implementation. So the number of times we get like a massive binder that says X consulting firm said there's a $30 million opportunity here, and I have no idea how to deliver on that. What are the actions, initiatives, ROI of those prioritization methodologies we should be using is what we do in translation. And then those end in roadmaps, but our goal is to implement on behalf of our clients to get them to the finish line through strategic program management, change management, execution, and implementation. And I think the value of having someone with an implementation operations hat on is that you will not get pie in the sky roadmaps and plans in that translation phase, because we know you might threaten to turn around and ask us to do it for you. And so our goal is to make sure that it's well vetted, it has the right budgets, you have the right skill sets in-house, the timelines are reasonable, because we might be on the hook for executing that, right? So even if you don't use it, that's how I think the value creation happens at Excelerate, is that we're always maniacally focused on that output, which is the thing across the finish line, the new process going live, the new technology going live, the new customer strategy going live, whatever it might be. Internally, we've recently launched a value creation, a description of value creation at Excelerate, in the spirit of how do you, Excelerate Consultant, create value for the business? And how do we think about what is less valuable to us versus more valuable to us in the activities that you are engaged in? And that process has been so cool to see how they received it. It really resonated with them. And I thought to myself, all we did really was be bold enough to say what's behind our compensation philosophy, basically. Like, really at the heart of it, it is, what are we willing to pay more for? Which activities are we willing to pay more for versus less for? And then you can choose if you want to do those activities, or you can make a really good living somewhere in the middle, right? Like, we're not pushing you to do that, but we will have development plans to help you generate that. And I just thought, like, the candid nature of that conversation, Can you imagine if like really large Fortune 500 companies did that level of, had that level of boldness about transparency?
Yeah. I think it's very courageous to have any transparency inside the organization. And it's also very necessary. You've learned it from an early age. You described learning it from your mom. And so you've been playing and practicing all long time.
Yeah.
And you've gotten to the level where you can have transparency in compensation discussions and say, this is actually how value is created and how compensation is earned.
Totally.
And you've done it opt-in. I think about the regulatory side, trying to mandate transparency on compensation. And the idea is that if only our CEOs could get to the point where they could get to where they could be transparent on how they compensate.
Yeah.
But forced transparency doesn't normally get you where you're actually aiming for.
Totally.
And so you did it optionally. You said, hey, listen, we want to open up this dialogue and we want everybody engaged and we want you to understand how we're paying and we want you to be able to choose where you spend your time. And we're wanting to help you in a coaching way, being able to develop into the things that could earn more money if that's what you're interested in. Or you can choose differently and it's okay. We're not going to be penalized because you won't spend time over here instead of there.
Totally.
It's a really beautiful story.
And it's so fascinating to me. The reason that the impetus for it was a conversation in which I was struggling to describe to someone what I thought versus what they thought about their current compensation, right? And I thought, what is it in this conversation that I know that this person doesn't know? Because two people of equal intelligence and aligned values, which I believe that we both were, the only real reason to disagree in my mind with those two components being true is information differences. And so I spent the majority of the weekend after that conversation thinking, what do I know that that person doesn't know? And how can I put it on paper? And I do think the struggle that CEOs have is not just the transparency, it's actually the clarity, because the clarity takes a long time to build. Like why do I pay more for that thing than the other thing, right? Like, so if you can't defend the clarity, then you're uncomfortable being transparent.
Of course, 100%, right. If you don't have actual things that you can reference and say, here's why I think this is my source. This is where I'm going for the information, either my own experience or others. But I'm basically, here's what I can write down. If you can't write down the strategy, you can't go transparent.
Totally.
And there's so many times in smaller companies as they're growing that compensation gets way out of whack and it's not actually clear. And if it were transparent, it would create enormous conflict. And so you end up needing to refine your strategies and bring them to the point where you could defend them before you get there. But I love the story of being able to keep on moving towards implementation. And how do you do that? You translate and you get it written down, and then you're willing to go out and do the work. On the client side, it's just a beautiful story. I think about the number of times where when we set up our organization, we had to set up whether we were consultants or coaches. Mm-hmm. And I used coaching as the words because I had had bad experiences with consulting and had only the binder and no implementation. And so it didn't make any sense. It wasn't able to be operationalized.
Yes.
And that was so frustrating.
Totally. We're rewriting that song, hopefully.
You're rewriting it. Congratulations. Yeah. If you could go back to your first step into the president role where you've got people underneath you and you've got to lead a team that's multifunctional and you're trying to figure that out, and you could give yourself one piece of advice back then, because you know a lot more now than you did then, what would you tell yourself back then?
The first answer is a little bit facetious, but don't have a baby at the same time is my first answer.
It's not actually, it's good. It's good. Priorities.
I found out that I was pregnant the day after I resigned from my job to help co-found Excelerate. And
oh boy,
it's just been, it's like two babies born at once, right? So that's more of like a small business owner's challenge, not necessarily a leader challenge, although related, but that has been tough. And so I learned a lot about giving myself grace and enjoying the highs and not spending too much time in the lows. on that journey. But I have a beautiful daughter, almost 6-year-old daughter, and an awesome, thriving company. And so it all worked out in the end. But I would say the more leadership focused one is that every era of a company's growth requires us to be different. And so knowing when your practices, your ways, when the company has outgrown your ways and you are in need of change is important. My husband has a plaque on the wall in his office that says, "You don't grow old, you grow old when you stop growing." And I just think that's so true. But for a leader, sure, we can be dedicated to continual learning mindsets and always being in that mode. But the identification of this practice that I have is actually not right for us anymore. Mm-hmm. And the willingness to step into that and say, I need to change is like maybe the most important thing I would take away about leading teams and companies and organizations.
I love it. I mean, what got you here won't get you there. The idea that even when you start, you know you're going to have to reinvent yourself and to be prepared for that while you're moving.
Yeah.
That's what I hear is just get used to that because it's going to happen over and over and over and over as you continue to build and grow. Really love that. Very cool.
Yeah.
If you're a young president looking to build purpose and profit, build a culture where everybody's engaged in doing that, to accelerate the growth, book a 15-minute call with me. I'd be happy to meet you and hear what you're thinking and see if we could potentially help. There's a Calendly link at encouragingleaders.com. Other than that, thank you so much for listening. And Jana, thanks so much once again for joining us.
Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate it.